welcome to a Book a Day podcast. I'm back with more books and more stories. And this time, in the next few days or weeks, I'm going to share stories from some prominent Indian figures. So stay with me and let's explore the stories of these historical figures which have truly shaped India as we know it. And starting this series, I'm going to go with the famous Bengali scientist, intellectual writer Jagadish Chandra Bose. And for his biography, I've got a wonderful book with me. It's called The Reluctant Physicist, written by Sudipto Das. And if you want to know more about the book itself, I would say please check out the essay that I've written on the book, which will be published this week. So you can find it on the website www.kalampedia.org. Coming to the book and the parts that I'm going to discuss here, let's start with the beginning of the book. Sudipto Das tells the story in such a way that it almost feels like you are in a movie. There's a lot of action. Immediately, you open the book and you get to a really interesting scene, which I'm going to describe very shortly. So, when you read the book, you feel like you are entering this world, and it starts with a bang. So let me narrate the first few paragraphs from the first chapter, and you'll get some idea what I'm talking about. When Bose was 19, he had his first experience of big game hunting. A landlord friend invited him to the Duars and Assam at the foothill of the Himalayas for a hunting holiday. It was to start from Madarihat, a small town in the Duars, located on the fringe of a large forest famous for the Indian one-horned rhinoceros, leopards, elephants, sambars, wild boars, and other animals. A palanquin carried Bose from Moghalhat railway station late in the evening, and when they reached Madarihat, it was dawn. The whole day was spent in the pursuit of animals, killing them and feasting on the hunt. Unfortunately, Bose came down with a terrible fever that very evening. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and it was decided that he should return to Calcutta immediately. But the palanquin was not available. "Can I take the horse?" Bose asked his friend, pointing to an animal grazing some distance away. "That's a dangerous one," warned his host. "It's a fine racer, but a brute with every known vice. It nearly killed the last rider, and no one has mounted it since then." Even before the sentence was completed, Bose had run towards the horse, released it from its tethering post, and leapt on it. Even the animal was taken aback. But a moment later, it neighed and reared, throwing the rider off its back. Bose landed on the soft, slushy ground, but within minutes he jumped back onto the unsuspecting horse, grabbed the reins, and pushed his feet into the stirrups. The horse neighed and snorted, bucked and reared, but then set off at a trot. Everyone watched in horror and amazement as the horse and rider vanished into the dense jungle. By the time Bose reached the Torsa River, it was already dark. He came to a bridge, the end of which was not visible. He stopped for a while and looked around, then peered into the gushing waters below. Whether it was a premonition or a hunter's instinct, Bose decided not to take the bridge. A little further on, he found a makeshift wooden bridge supported by bamboo poles. He dug the stirrups into the horse's flanks, spurring it to gallop over the creaking and wobbling bridge. Bose saw the silhouette of the other bridge to his left. It ended abruptly in the middle. The rest of it had been washed away. Bose and his mount were still on the makeshift bridge. The crackling sounds got louder. The planks were swaying perilously. Bose urged the horse to move faster. They had barely reached the end when the bridge crumbled and collapsed behind them, the shafts and the bamboo poles vanishing into the silent darkness of the water. When Bose finally reached Cooch Behar, he managed to get a palanquin in the sleepy town to transport him to Moghalhat. With very high temperature and extreme weakness, he waited for the train to take him back. When he got home, he was told that he was suffering from the deadly Kala Azar, a fever that was debilitating and not likely to leave the body in a hurry. It was to plague him for several years. So you get the idea, the adventure, the action, the drama that unfolds right from the beginning. And that's what I liked, and I found something unique about this biography. That it's almost like a story. You're not learning about one person's life, but you are entering it. You're entering the stage and then seeing it, what's going on there. And it's almost like the exposition that you find in novels. That's how it begins. It begins with this scene, talks about Bose, his adventures as a hunter. And then there's a bit of flashback. We go to the history, what's going on in his family, where does he come from, the origins of the family, their values, their cultural and religious traditions, how and when Bose was born, all the circumstances, and then on to his childhood. So that's what we learn in the initial couple of chapters. And once again, the writing style is such that you don't feel like you're absorbing too much of information there. It's almost like a story moving at its own pace and gently taking you into the life of Jagadish Chandra Bose. So let me narrate a couple of passages from the next chapter where the writer is talking about the childhood of Bose and his schooling and hostel days. So here we go. Since his home in Burdwan was some 60 miles away from Calcutta, Bose was sent to a hostel. For one used to roaming around freely, it was like a prison. But there too, he gradually created his own small world of moving and living things. He spent his pocket money on buying pets, rabbits, pigeons, and even a long-tailed lamb. In one corner of the compound, he created a garden with a little artificial stream and a narrow wooden bridge over it, in an attempt to get a splash of Faridpur in Calcutta. Quite ingeniously, he came up with a simple mechanism that fed the stream with a continuous flow of water through a winding aqueduct of half-open discarded pipes. The water would flow from a broken bucket placed at a height, acting as a reservoir, and collect at the end of the stream in a small pool. Bose would spend a good part of his time watching the water meandering through the pipes, flowing under the bridge, and finally filling up the small pool at the other end. He would then refill the bucket with water from the pool and wait until it was full again. It was the beginning of his lifelong quest to see continuity in everything. So you see how brilliantly writer weaves this tale. We are being given the information of his childhood, but it's more like a story form, and it's easy to digest. And then we learn how enterprising and self sufficient this guy was at such a young age. And from there, from school, he moves on to the college and university, and we learn about the subsequent chapters of Bose's life. And remember, this was still the 19th century, which means India was still under the British colonialism. So he had his own struggles there. He faced racism, although he was going to these elite institutions, but still you find some kind of institutional racism there. So he had to work his way up there. So from being a student to becoming a scientist, researcher, professor, he had to go through these struggles. And once he has gone through all these struggles, I think that's when the real story begins. That's when we find what Jagadish Chandra Bose actually does there. And he works on these two important fields, which are in physics, electromagnetic waves, and in biology, especially in botany, he works on the study of life of plants, and that's something brilliant that he achieved. Another thing that I liked about the book was how carefully author has weaved certain mythological stories and cultural aspects of Bose's life, and it almost feels surreal when he's talking about, let's say, a particular aspect of nature, and then he goes on to connect that with both mythology as well as science. So I'll give you an example where he talks about lightning, and he connects it with the Hindu god Indra. So I'll read a couple of paragraphs from here, and you'll get the idea how he's connecting the mythological stories with the scientific facts. So he says, as a child, Bose had heard stories about Indra's weapon Vajra, and how the fierce god of gods could strike a cloud, a glacier, or a dam with it to kill the demons who kept the waters confined. The Vajra was described in the Rig Veda as a metallic thunderbolt shaped like a discus or two crossed transverse bolts, which then rotated, threw out sparks causing lightning. Interpreting the Vajra phenomenon through modern science, it can be inferred that the Rigvedic Indians knew that an electrified metallic object discharges its electricity through lightning like sparks. The ancient Etruscans were also supposed to have attracted lightning by shooting metal arrows, their Vajras, into the clouds. In 1752, Benjamin Franklin flew a kite with a conducting hemp string during a thunderstorm and collected the electricity of the lightning in a Leyden jar. A dangerous stunt that could have killed him. 140 years later, in 1892, during a lecture at the Royal Institution of Great Britain, the maverick electrician Nikola Tesla directed the flaming sparks from his electrified hands at a metallic ball, much like Indra might have done. Then he held a vacuum tube with his hands by passing the electricity from his hands to the tube. He made it glow like a flaming sword. The exuberant English press described him as a member of the Order of the Flaming Sword. Indra's Vajra, the metal arrows of the Etruscans, Franklin's kite, and Tesla's hand were all essentially the receivers of radio waves created by lightning or an electric spark. Jagadish Chandra Bose would soon be inducted into the ancient order of the Vajra. So you can see the writing style here. The author has previously written fiction books and has covered the mythological aspects of Indian literature, so you can understand where he is coming from. And that's why you find these elements here, where he's connecting these elements with the biography of a scientist. Personally, I find it really interesting. I find it more entertaining that you get so much excitement and drama when you add these elements. So coming back to the story of Jagadish Chandra Bose, once we get into the field of science, then we get to the heart of the subject, where the author talks about the scientific research and discoveries made by Jagadish Chandra Bose. And I think if you are a science enthusiast or a student of science, you are going to love it. And that's another thing I found fascinating about it, that it's not really covering the story or the life of Jagadish Chandra Bose, which he does, like from the childhood to his friendships with Tagore or Nivedita, life in Bengal, life in India, British India, all those aspects. But right in the heart of it, there is so much science. And no wonder that the author is from IIT, one of the IITs, is that he understands the science behind it. And he explains these phenomena in such an interesting and simple way that as a student of science, you are going to be fascinated by it. And if you're not a student of science, if you haven't really studied science, I would say you might struggle with certain processes, certain things explained in the book. You might struggle with that. But if you are into science, a little bit of it, especially physics, you are going to absolutely love it. And for that one reason alone, I would say student of science, students of physics, the young ones, they are going to be really, they're going to get inspired by the book. They're going to get inspired by the contents with the journey of Jagadish Chandra Bose. So if you are one of them, if you are a science enthusiast, if you are somebody who's curious about life of Jagadish Chandra Bose, and even not just as a scientist but as an intellectual, somebody who lived in British India and was an intellectual giant of the time, if you want to learn about the details of his life and the details of the world that he lived in, you're going to enjoy this book. So with that, I'll take your leave, and I'll come back with another wonderful Indian in the next episode. So stay with me, keep following, and I'll catch you the next time. Thank you.